Okay.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's community event hosted by Product People. I'm Elisa Cantamessa, Associate Product Manager of Product People, and tonight I will be your host event. Product People is a product management consultancy and community builder on a mission to help companies discover and deliver great product faster. We invite product leaders to share their story and help us discover more about the world of product management. And we are working on different clients from different industry, as you can see from here. And at the moment, we are actually hiring. So if you think you're a good fit for a product manager here at Product People, please send your CV at the productpeople.join.com, and we will be more than happy to have you with us. For today's event, we have Fanny, product manager at Doctolib, and she will talk us about how to build in product in a vaccination task force. So I will leave the word to Fanny and enjoy.
Thank you very much. I'll be sharing my screen. And you should be able to see my screen now, right? Perfect. Thank you very much, Elisa, for the intro. My name is Fanny, and I will be talking to you about a topic that we've all, I think, been hearing a lot this past month, the pandemic, the vaccinations, but I will be talking to you about this with a new angle, I hope, a product angle. And I will share with you how we built the vaccination product for the vaccination campaigns in France and in Germany. I've been working in the travel industry for 6 years before the pandemic started last year. In April 2020, got the opportunity to join Doctolib, so change from the travel industry to healthcare. And I felt very excited about the mission from Doctolib. Doctolib has two main missions. One is to improve the daily life of healthcare professionals. The second mission is to improve patient access to healthcare and patient health. So these two missions really excited me. I was super happy to join. And when I joined, the scope of my team was to improve the satisfaction of hospital users. When I say users, I mean mostly pro users. I work on the B2B product of Doctolib. And we were excited about the mission, had a plan, we're ready to start with the plan in December. And what changed was at the end of November, on November 25th, my manager called me in a meeting with another PM and a designer, a couple of tech people. And the meeting was called Vaccination Kickoff. And this was the start of what we call the vaccination task force. It was not sure yet that we would be involved, but he said we might be involved in the vaccination effort for the Berlin Senate, and we had to think about what this could look like for the product, but for Doctolib and for the Senate themselves. At this stage, not confirmed, and there were some things we knew, but also some things we did not know. What we knew was that for the vaccination to be considered as successful, 2 injections would be needed. We knew it had to be a specific number of days between the 2 injections, most likely 21 days. We knew that because of the number of doses available, not everyone could be vaccinated at once, and that the prioritization would happen with vaccination codes, that people would get a code per post, and then this code would allow them to book an appointment, and this code would also define to which center they would be going to get the vaccination. There were still stuff that we did not know, amongst other things that we didn't know which vaccine would be approved and when. This was still unknown. We also didn't know how many doses would be available. There were some assumptions, obviously, how many doses each state would get, but that was not sure completely. It was also not sure which information was needed to book. We knew there would be a call center taking a reservation. There would be also a website to take the reservations, but not exactly the information that had to be provided for the booking. And we also didn't know how it would look like on site. So we have a strong focus on B2B products. So we do a lot of things for GPs, for doctors, for hospitals, for vaccinations. Obviously, it was new. We did not do anything yet. But we also didn't know what the process on site would be and what the different steps would be. So hard to know and guess how we could help them at this stage. But still, the plan was most people would be vaccinated pretty fast in Berlin. The idea would be to do the first injections first, the second injections then in another batch, and that most people would be vaccinated in a rather short time. That was pretty optimistic at the time. Now we know that. But still, we knew that it was short-term project, very intense probably, and had a deadline because as soon as the vaccine would be approved, then they had to take the reservation. So we had roughly a month. I think the initial start was planned for December 15th, was postponed slightly because the vaccine was not approved. It ended up being end of December, but we knew that we had roughly a month to get this on track. Oops. So we did have a plan. First, the plan was to set up the centers to manage the appointments. That means we knew when they would open. They roughly knew at some point how many doses they would have and how many appointments they could get per day. It obviously had to be managed in a way that not everyone would come at the same time because it's a very contagious pandemic. You don't want everyone who's vulnerable and need the vaccination to come at the same time, but also to be optimized in a way that the vaccination would be as efficient and fast as possible so that it wouldn't take another 10 years of pandemic to get through this. So we had this constraint, but for this part, we felt pretty confident. We have a great ops team to set this up. They have amazing, we had also a great booking management system. So for this part, we felt pretty good. Had to change a bit of the some things for the performance of the product because of the super high volume, obviously, but still this part was easy. We had to build a system for code validation because of this prioritization of the different groups. This was new, we didn't have this, but this again was mostly requirements and making sure that if a code was already used, you couldn't book it again and to allocate with the code to the right center. So this part also had to build it and it was fairly easy. Then we had to make sure that people would have to get the 2 injections at once. That was very important. Some countries decided to vaccinate most people with at least 1 injection so that they would get at least some benefits from the vaccinations. But in Germany, it was decided that we wanted to have the most vulnerable people fully vaccinated so that they would be completely okay. And then the next group. So these 2 injections at once was very important. And at the time we built this, it was, I think, 21 days exactly that had to be done between the 2 injections. And this is important because this also led later on to some bottlenecks. Because obviously, if you want 21 days exactly between the 2 injections, we could only suggest slots where you could get 1 appointment and the other because we didn't want to have people with only 1 injection and not having the benefits. Remember, this was end of November, beginning of December. So there are still many unknowns about how efficient the vaccination would be if you only had 1. So first decision was taken to have the 2 injections booked together. That would be working obviously for patients, but also on the other hand for the call center, so that the call center agents would also take the 2 appointments at once. So we had to make sure every time a slot is suggested, they can get the 2 injections. Then we also had to make it easy for the people working in the vaccination centers who are not necessarily the typical Doctolib users or the typical GPs. Those are other people working from other health organizations. We had to make it easy for them to handle vaccinations on site, and they have many steps in the process, many things to document. I think they have, like, in Berlin, they had up to 5 documents from patients that they had to scan each time. And this had to be also very efficient, right? Because if they had to open a scanner every time, scan something, link it to the patient, this would take time. And this had to be smooth. So we ended up making a process adjusted to them that would also allow them to go pretty fast in the centers themselves. The last thing is also very specific. So in Germany, we have the Robert Koch Institute. I think there's similar organizations in every country that collect statistics and reportings about vaccination numbers to know how many people, what's percentage of the populated, but also to track charges number in case there's anything wrong with vaccines. They are able to go back and trace this. So this was important. There's a specific tool where they could have entered all this data, but that this would have meant they would have to do it in two websites, which obviously is also not something that is time efficient. So they needed an easy way to report this every day to this organization. So this was the plan. We got then the two teams working on this. We had one team working on this on the pro side, my team, and we had another team on the patient side to make all the changes necessary there. And the two teams made it work. We had to be ready, as I said, for the end of December, which, as you see here, we managed with a small tweak just before. I think the vaccine was approved on December 27th. So the first appointments were taken on 27th of December. Slightly before this, and I think when I checked, it was on the 21st of December. So 1 week roughly before that, we had to change some of the point number 2 here on the slide. Actually, we had to change because it was first meant and built to decide where people would go, in which center they would go. But what happened is every center had different vaccines, so not all the centers had all the vaccines. And because I think in December, the chancellor in Germany answered to journalists in a press conference that people would be able to choose the vaccine. That meant our feature or this decision from the Berlin Senate wouldn't apply anymore because people couldn't choose if the code would choose the center, and there was only one vaccine per center. Which is 1 week before the launch, we had to change this logic again and make it more flexible so that patients could then choose which vaccine and which center they wanted to go to, which I believe is much better if people can choose the center, but was a last minute rush before going live, which we still made. So end of December, first appointments came in. So that was good. But this was only the first step. Our CEO always says this is just the beginning. So wanted to add this sentence here. And it's true, this was only the beginning. Obviously, this was only for Berlin and only for vaccination centers. But there was much more to do for the vaccination campaigns, both in France and in Germany. In France, we also had a contract with the French state. They chose 3 companies, including Doctolib, to help with the vaccination efforts. And we had to launch then vaccination centers in France. Here again, great ops team, great key account team. They managed to set up all those centers. And we also had the learnings from Berlin. So altogether, we felt pretty confident also with launching these centers. And we ended up, I think to this day, we have over 1,800 centers in France, so vaccination centers, which is pretty amazing considering 90% of vaccinations are actually done in centers and not in GPs offices. So it's like this massive effort from the teams here. But because obviously this is people going there or setting it up manually, each of the centers is not so scalable. And we had 20,000 GPs also that we knew would be involved in vaccinations. One of the challenges with the vaccines that were approved, both the Moderna and the BioNTech, was that they had to be stored in these special fridges. Not every GP has this, and that's why the vaccination centers also became very handy. But still, it was counted on GPs and pharmacists and different specialists to also be involved in the vaccination, especially with AstraZeneca and Johnson being much easier to store. So for these ones, all those doctors that we also wanted to enable to vaccinate, we need to have a scalable product so that they could also be involved without having this manual setup at first. For these ones, we did an onboarding tool so that they could very easily themselves set everything up, have the 2 injections, has the time between the 2 injections, and a doses management system so that they would only get the number of appointments based on the number of doses they had and then not get too many appointments. So this was done also for GPs and specialists, and also actually for some companies in Germany. There were some big companies also vaccinating their employees. They also ended up using this. Then we had to update the time between the injections. So I mentioned when we started, it was 21 days exactly, and that was in December. And because the information changes very quickly, studies came in, and then it was discovered also that maybe it doesn't have to be exactly 21 days. It can also be longer. If you take longer and it's as efficient, then you can also vaccinate more people because you can spread the number of doses that you need on more time. So then the time between the injection changed, and actually changed quite frequently because then the new studies came in. And the thing that's also some logistical reasons that you want to find this balance of how efficient it can be and how many people you can still vaccinate. So we had to make this more flexible, which also at the end ended up in some bottlenecks again with availabilities, because if you plan 21 days exactly and then you make it longer, obviously you needed 2 slots, so some slots are already taken. So I think this came back to some extent, but still we had to do this, make it more flexible. We also wanted to prevent these incomplete vaccinations, because it was super important that people do get those 2 injections. At some point we came up with a product that was helping practitioners to spot when someone had only 1, didn't show up to the other injection, or if by some way people actually had 3 appointments. So basically vaccination appointment mistakes, or if you didn't show up to your second appointment, the doctors needed to call you and then ask if you had another booking or not. So we had a whole project for this, but because the information again changes very quick, and became obsolete because there were so many scenarios where people only needed 1. So you could have COVID already and need only 1 injection. This was not that known before that. Or also you could have 1 injection somewhere and then another somewhere else. So that also means that for the doctor that saw you the first time, you only had 1 appointment, but actually you had 2. So we didn't end up actually shipping this, but still worked on that. At some point it was a discussion. And the last thing was we needed to make it more flexible. So we had those 2 injections, the time between the 2 injections, but especially in Germany and especially GP, so for decentralized vaccination, the number of doses was so low that for them, booking the 2 injection was not so convenient. And they would rather have 1 injection booked, and then when the patient was on site, book the second injection. And then being able to take more appointments, so we also needed to find a system to make this a bit more flexible. The same thing with this time between injection, and that's a small difference between Germany and France. In France, there was this recommendation, and it has to be exactly this recommendation. So if you say, for example, between 21 and 30 days, that's the time you can have for your second shot. Whereas in Germany, it's more a suggestion, and then practitioners could decide on their own if they wanted to go lower or higher than this based on their own needs or the doses they had. So this also needed to be changed afterwards. So those were the next steps, but those are like some of the things we did. I'm happy also to go more in depth in any other features we built during the vaccine, like for the vaccination task force. But what I want to show is like more what it meant for us to be in a task force, because it's a pretty exceptional project, or at least I hope it doesn't happen so often anymore to be in exactly this situation, right? We want the vaccination to go only once. So what we did, or what it meant for us to be in a task force. First, obviously, this is something so huge that it's not 1 team that worked on that. It was several teams. I think at some point, the time where it was the most intense, we were up to 4 or 5 teams, product teams working together on different features. But it's not only tech and product teams, obviously, it's also marketing teams. It is also ops teams, key account teams, support teams, all the people working together on different parts of this task force. And it was needed then to have super good alignment. So every day we had between 15 and half an hour meetings where we discussed what was done, what would be done, and what were the new changes, because every day there were new surprises and new things to adapt. So we needed those meetings to be all aligned. And as I mentioned, changes. So we needed to adapt and be super agile, because every day as studies came out or governments knew things or needed to take some decisions, obviously the product needed to be adapted as well. So it wasn't rare that one day we decided something and then the next day something else came out. So this is something that we had to consider as well. What really helped us was to have dedicated project managers who had the overview of all the things that were going on, both in France and in Germany. And this really allowed us, the product teams, to focus on doing actually the job and shipping stuff for our practitioners. Obviously, we had to make assumptions. As I said, things were decided as we were working on them. A lot of people also did not know and were deciding. So that happened when we didn't know the process in the centers, but also in general. there were a lot of things that, 2 months from now are different than now. It's a very exceptional situation, also for decision makers, and a lot of stuff came out very late. So when we were building some things, we had to make assumptions, knowing that later on we would have to iterate, hoping we wouldn't have to iterate too much, obviously, but we knew this would happen. Based on feedback, based on user research, which ended up being sometimes a bit challenging, because if you work on something with some kind of pressure, right? Also, practitioners or centers had to vaccinate a lot of people. To call them to ask how they're using the product and what could be improved, obviously, is not always having so much time for this. We still worked, we still did it. We called them, we talked to them, we collected feedbacks, we had those webinars, we had surveys, and they really could tell us as they were doing it and as they were learning how to vaccinate, and how this would work for them, how many doses they would get, how they would call their patients. We could get all this information and then change our product so that would fit their needs better. We also checked a lot of data. Obviously, we checked how much time was needed and whether it got stuck in the product, so we could here again adapt to their needs and help them to manage their appointments much better. What was also very important and very needed was a very strong collaboration with tech. This is always very important, but I think here for such a project, even more so, because you have to take decisions so fast and react so quickly that you tend to take a lot of shortcuts. And it's important to have this really strong connection with tech so that you decide mindfully when a shortcut is needed, when you create problems later on, when you need to invest a few more days to actually build something in a more stable way. Obviously also assess risk and feasibility, decide which technical that you want to take, what you can tackle later on. And this has to be a very good discussions to be able to maintain this on the long term. And the last one is new users and stakeholders. So because of all the specificities, many of the features we built are not the typical features that our usual pro users are needing, right? A lot of stuff are very specific to vaccination. And you have to find, or we had to find this balance between what is needed for this specific project and what's needed in general, what could benefit our other users as well. We try to keep features flags to a minimum because that always brings more technical debt and stuff that you need to clean later on. You don't always want to do this. So we try to keep this to a minimum, but also not bring in too much complexity to the regular users. So here again, decisions with the tech team, also country specific. We had France and Germany, very similar to some extent on the vaccination, but also very different in some specific stuff. So here again, we had to sometimes do one feature for one country and not the other one, try to keep it to a minimum, but still it happened. And I put also stakeholders because we used to work with healthcare professionals, we used to work with patients. What we were not so used to work with was the governments, especially 2 different governments who were themselves figuring out what to do on a very exceptional situation, right? So as everyone was figuring this out, we had to try to make everyone happy, and the patients who needed to get their appointments, and the professionals who actually needed to manage appointments, and the governments who needed to get rid of this pandemic somehow. So not easy always, and probably not everyone is happy all the time, but this is the scenario we had to work with. But now I just wanted to show you some numbers, and I don't want to go in the details. This is just to show you the massive growth from appointments from the 27th of December when it started until now, more or less how many appointments actually took place. And I'm very happy that this actually happens. The same for France. So we're much bigger in France than we are in Germany, so that's why the number is actually much higher. But we have now over half of the French population with at least 1 injection. That's pretty amazing. And this is very fresh. So yesterday, the French president made an announcement about vaccination being mandatory for people working in healthcare, especially because of the Delta variant. They really want to focus on vaccination. And after he announced this on French TV, we had a peak of reservations on Doctolib. So props to all my colleagues who worked. I'm on holidays, so I was not working, but all my colleagues actually were involved in this. Props to them, because we got 17,000 appointments per minute after the announcement, which is pretty amazing. here the second message says 900,000 French people actually got appointment. This morning I checked, there was another message from our CEO saying 1.3 million of appointments were taken since yesterday. So that's absolutely amazing. I think the more people get vaccinated, the better. So obviously I'm very happy about this, but I think that's the best achievement anyone can have as a PM, is to see how many people actually use your product and can benefit from something. It's just not any product, it's a product that really goes in the right direction. Just also bringing me to my conclusion. So in this project was pretty exceptional, and I think didn't have any time to be bored. Obviously, we were very busy this past month, as you could imagine. Product, it's not perfect. I think this we all know it cannot be perfect if you work with such a short time frame on things changing all the time. If you ever heard of scope creep, I think this was a boot camp of having scope creep. You know, you have to make it through, even everything changes every day. You have to make it through. But I think considering the situations, we did an exceptional job in this exceptional situation. And I'm personally very happy and grateful that I could contribute to this, and that my manager also trusted me. I joined last year in June. I was involved in November, so it's pretty new in the company, and I could be involved in that. So I'm very happy about this. If you want to join us and be also working on such amazing products, we are hiring. Here you have the address, check it out. We do have many jobs in France and in Germany, also in Italy now, so please check it out. And if you have any questions, I think we can open and answer those. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Fanny. It was really interesting and amazing. And actually a lot of people from YouTube, they are congratulating you. We have Mirella, great work, Fanny. Elif, great job, Fanny. And Sylvie, wow, really great.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are more than happy to accept any questions. And also Inessa, she's telling super interesting. So it was really interesting and discovering this. So while we wait for some question, I actually have one. I was wondering if you, during this super, I guess it was quite eclectic time when you did this, if ever blocker came up, what was yours and your team way of actually resolving possible blocker during this situation when you have such a short time and the importance of delivery with so many stakeholders in the...
That's a great question, and I think it happened to us almost every day, more or less, that we had some kind of blockers, sometimes small blockers, sometimes bigger blockers. But this was definitely something we discussed always in the sync meetings we had in the morning. We had, I think, a slide where we had to everyone put questions, and then we had the end of the sync meeting where we just brainstormed solutions. Which was great because we had people from different teams. We had people, you know, from the ops team, people from the support team, people from the marketing team, and tech and product, obviously. So we could always, whenever something new came up and we didn't know how to handle it, we could always, as a team, really work together and find a solution and discuss this, which is typically what you do in alignment meetings when you do a typical product job. Usually you just take longer, you know, to schedule the meeting, find a decision and take action, which is in our way just much smaller because we took this in this meeting and then an hour after some developers were already implementing it. So I think it's just like condense of whatever you do always, just in much more shorter timeframes.
Thank you, that's really interesting. We have a question from YouTube. Mohammed asked, how did the engineers reach to the changing requirement? I can see that you didn't kill each other. I mean, how the engineer reacted to the changing requirement? Sorry.
Yes, this is a good question as well. It was, I think, because it's such an impactful project, easy at first for everyone to be very into it and very involved. Everyone understood how important it was, and I think it's easy then to also accept some stuff that you wouldn't accept on a regular basis, which wouldn't have been much easier if it was on a shorter time. But after some time, we also all knew that this was not such a short time project anymore. and that we always say we are working on we're running a marathon, we're not running a sprint. And at first we took it as a sprint, and at some point we also had to reorganize how we work. It was, I would lie if I would say it was always easy for them to take in changing requirements. I think what really helped was to have really strong connections between product and tech and discuss stuff and explain why something was needed. I think it didn't happen so often that we took decisions and worked on something that was not needed, which would end up being very demotivating for the teams. So usually we also made a lot of effort on making sure that what we actually did had an impact and was necessary. As much as we could. It was not always perfect, obviously. And then also because there is some psychological safety in teams when it was too much, that teams also made clear that now we had to take different pace and then sometimes also change and get more people involved. That's also why I mentioned at some point we were up to 5 teams, because there's only so much that teams can handle, right? So everyone's happy to change requirements, but after 7 months, you also need to take it slower and then maybe get more people involved. So had a more turnover and get more people in.
Yes, thank you. Augustine from from Zoom, she thank you for your enlightening session. She's actually a doctor and she would love to join your team and she will reach out. So if Augustine, if you have any question and you wanna ask them, please feel free to do it. We also have a question here from Zoom. Did the lifting on the prioritization in Germany beginning of June cause any challenge for you?
Yes, definitely, because most of the work was based on having those prioritization groups, right? So people would book only in batches, only a number of given people at the same time would get appointments. Obviously, when this was lifted, more people access this website at the same time, right? So it came with 2 challenges. First, frustration of people not getting appointments, because even if the prioritization was lifted, there was only a number of doses available, right? So not everyone could get appointments at the same time. On the other hand, it also came with technical challenges because it loaded our platform with a number of people at the same time that we did not expect. And we had, or at least the tech team had to do massive changes to be able to cope with this, because we have one website, right? If it breaks in one part, it also breaks on the for other people. So we had to make some changes there to be able to cope with the number of people, but then also it's not an easy change because of those 2 injections. So we always had to still make suggest availabilities for people who get the 2 shots together, which was not an easy thing, especially when a lot of people tried to get appointments, which means every time someone wanted to get the appointment, we had to block the 2 slots, the time they would get the appointment, because it's not you click and it's booked, right? You have to fill some things, which involves some caching, and the caching also blocks it for other people. So this at some point became worse and worse because people were refreshing, and then this was blocking it for other people, right? So I guess at some point we even had memes in Berlin about, the message that you would see when you couldn't get appointments. So a lot of people got really frustrated with this, with the prioritization, but I think overall the number of people got appointments, people could get vaccinated. So overall, it's like we had some issues to find the slots, but people still managed to get some. And at the same time, when they removed the prioritization for centers, they also removed it. I think just before that, they also removed it for GPs, so people also had the chance to go to the doctor and try to get appointments there. So, but yeah, it did bring some challenges.
Thank you, Stephen, for the question, and thank you, Fanny, for the answer. Yes, also here in Barcelona, it's not so easy getting an appointment. It was not so easy at the beginning, and it's still there's some improvement need to be done. We have another question from Noseba from YouTube. Great job, Fanny. I think in this product you did a lot of prioritization. What criteria you took on consideration? Which method did you use?
So it really depended on the time in the project. So at first, obviously, we had to work on what was the most needed. So it was mostly was mostly government putting the prioritizations, right, of what was needed because they had constraints and we needed to cope with the constraint, and having our users, so the pro users in mind or patients in mind, we knew, what was needed first. So that was fairly defined at first. Then we knew what was coming. So it was the decentralized vaccination. So it was really the steps on how the campaigns would be working that defined that. And then once we had the products out, the prioritization was done mostly in checking what was the most painful. So at some point we checked that, okay, now we have a lot of calls to our support teams. This is not maintainable. We have to make sure that those calls drop, and then check what were the reasons for these calls, and then work on that. Or having issues with, okay, a lot of practitioners, like we wanted, what we do is help practitioners to get more of their time, right? So that they don't handle phone calls. If they handle phone calls, it's because they cannot get online bookings. Why are the reasons they cannot get online bookings and get patient booking on their own the appointments? So it's always like trying to figure, like to navigate between external constraints. And let's be honest, there were a lot of these coming out every on a regular basis. We had new things that we also had to work with, but also keeping an eye on how the product was doing and how we could help our users. So we didn't have, there are a lot of techniques. There's the rest of the companies use products, which is not something we could apply so easily for vaccination. It was more kind of a feeling of when we work, what is the most important now and what is the most impactful and valuable.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for this really interesting question. Inessa from YouTube, she's asking, Fanny, could you tell how did you create a focus for your team, given that there were so many things would tackle?
This is a great question, because we did have this issue in our team at some point that everything was changing so often that the engineers in my team also told me they didn't really know what was the most important anymore. And we ended up being also slower to deliver because, when you have too many things, it's really hard to know what's the most important one. And we ended up having more regular alignment meetings also in my team. And we had, at some point, I ended up every morning when I started working, I sent them a message with what we did the day before, because it's important also to remember what you achieve in such a high-speed project. You always focus to what's coming next, but you never look back. So it was also important to say, okay, this is what we did yesterday. This is what is the focus today. And this is what is the work focus, in the sprint. We still worked with sprint in some extent. They always change, but we still tried. But every day we had, okay, this is the milestone of the day. This is what we want to achieve this day. It changed sometimes after the alignment meeting with the other teams that my message was already out and then it was already obsolete an hour later, so I had to change it. But over communication was what we did to keep the focus, I think.
Thank you. Sylvie from YouTube, she's asking, did you have also to consider some extra hacking risk as you design your solution? How did you manage it?
Yes, so we did consider risks. There were probably some risks that we could have considered better, but we did consider risks, mostly performance risks, because that was one of the main risks we had to tackle at first. Maybe one risk that we didn't consider as much was then the impact on the support teams. We did not think that so many doctors would then also call us because they wouldn't know how to handle this and how to, they were also kind of clueless, right? Because they didn't get too much information on how they needed to do their campaigns. I think most of the tech risks actually we did speak about, because since the tech team were always involved in the discussions as well, they managed always to bring these. And then how we handle them was always discussing and then deciding, okay, we always have this kind of struggle between product and tech, that product wants to get more stuff shipped and that tech wants to make them more maintainable. And I think it's a very healthy discussion to have, because that's where you can decide very mindfully which shortcuts you want to take and which risks you want to accept. And once you need, to say, now we can do this really quickly, it's very small, and then maybe we fix it later, and then we see. So considering risk was part of decisions.
Thank you. We have now a question from Zoom from Hamad. How was the requirement gathering process like for you and your team? And how did you go about designing and implementing the features?
It was kind of chaotic at first, I would say, because a lot of requirements were not clear as well. For when we started at the very beginning, a lot of stuff were unclear also for the people in charge of the vaccination campaigns, because they were designing the processes at the same time as we were designing the products. So we knew a lot of stuff would change, and it did happen. We changed a lot of stuff all the time. Designing requirements, and when you got a bit quieter, if I dare, got a bit better, and then the pace wasn't as intense. And we also brainstormed a lot with the teams, and then we said, this is the problem, how can we get to the solution? So really back to this more typical product work, where you don't come with a sheet of requirements, but you say, okay, we have this issue, we want to make, get more online bookings. How can we help practitioners get more online bookings based on the data we knew they wouldn't get online bookings because of doses or opening hours, or where to put this in the scheduling? So we got defined problems, and then with the problems with the teams, and find solutions. So the requirements were discussions. We have a process also at Doctolib where tech teams have always, when you work on a project, you have always a tech holder, which is a person from the engineering team who's in charge of the project and coming up with technical solutions and constraints. And this person always got, like, we still managed with this project to always get a tech holder involved. So again, the typical processes we have, but on the shorter timeframes.
Thank you. I actually have another question, and I was wondering, what are the main learning you actually got from this short period, and if there's something that actually make you change your way of tackling your everyday PM life?
Yeah, maybe even the answer would be the same to both questions, and that is measuring the value of what you do. Because when you work on something with such a high speed, you cannot really afford to work on something that is not valuable and waste time, because every time you waste, it's like shipping something that is needed a bit later. And you know that if you take longer, it's not that that something not so important, that's still important but not so important, comes later. Here it's like, you know that less people would get vaccinated, or centers would have to work longer. You really don't want to do this. So really focusing on value. And that's a discussion I also have a lot with my manager, because he also told me a couple of times that I really should focus more on this. And I think through this project, I got to understand this much better, and even more how important this is. I think that's also something that for my future projects I will consider much more. It's like really ask, is this needed? If I ship this rather than this, is it like, would I feel happy with this? If I would ship something that is maybe but I didn't do my job as a PM to check that it would be impactful, then I wouldn't feel that good. And it did happen. I mentioned it before with this monitoring dashboard that we wanted to have. One of the learnings would have been me as a PM. I should have cut the effort that we spent on work on this earlier, because I should have questioned it earlier. And I would guess this is my main learning, is like always question things, and always be sure that when I'm working on something, this is the most impactful thing.
Thank you. That's really an amazing answer. We have another question from Noseba. What was the main guidelines for you during the development process, as well as was changing very fast?
So in terms of how we build the product, or I'm not sure I don't completely understand the question. What terms of guidelines?
From YouTube. So I think during the development process, so when you were actually building the product, so what was yes, the main guideline? Yes, when you were building the product.
So when we were building, as I said, we have those stakeholders. So each time an engineer is in charge of writing what we call tech scoping. So they come with discussions and decisions of what we need to do. And then they align with the other teams also to see that it won't disrupt the rest of the product. So because that was obviously something very important, that we would build all those features for vaccination, but we do have a running website for many users, getting their medical appointments out of vaccinations also, and this still needed to work. So we always have to make this. So that's why we had those processes in place. Also with the vaccination that we couldn't completely forget. So we were a task force, but that just meant that we did all the stuff that we do just faster and in shorter time, but we still had to go through alignment, making sure we don't break other things, and that we still respect our principles, our delivery principles, I would say. I hope that answered the questions. If not, ask again.
Yes, let's see if Nosiba will give us some answer on that, but it was really interesting to understand. Maybe we have some other questions. If you are in the Zoom event, please, you can mute yourself and ask a question directly to Fanny. Okay, then I can go with another question. Yes, no, Siba says that it was a clear thank you. So
okay, thank you.
That was a good answer. Good. Okay, so what another question I have was how do you find out that during this process the environment with your team grows stronger, or it also end up having more challenging situation where was a difference between ideas and people inside the team who actually came out easier as it was such in a short time?
That's also a very interesting question. So because the team was built during the pandemic, we mostly worked remote the whole time, which you all also in product people, you're all remote people as well. So you do know it's great in some extent, but also comes with challenges. And I think especially when it comes to really close collaboration online, sometimes you have the issues that you don't ask questions, at least not right away. And that's just not the luxury we had with this project. We had to ask questions right away. We couldn't, think too long or on specific stuff. So I think it definitely helped our team to get out of this comfort zone of sometimes, taking a bit too much time to think and wait and find your own path and try to understand things on your own. I think we all got much better at asking for help and making sure that we could have discussions and also working on the same thing. The whole team working on the same thing brings a sense of unity in a way, and then you really I think in our team we really felt, and also with the other teams working on the vaccination, we really felt together part of something great also, and seeing the impact and seeing this brought a sense of community. So I think it brought the team closer together.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And yes, you're right. Working remotely sometimes is easier to try to think about your own about solution and then ask question to someone else.
Yeah.
Now we will stop screaming and we can meet on Zoom for some networking. So if you please want to join us on Zoom, soon on the chat will appear the link for join us here, and we can keep chatting with Fanny as well. Sylvie also say from YouTube, thank you very much for your presentation and your transparency about your product. It was very enlightening.